Friends of Ukraine and Friends of Christians in Ukraine. The Commission will come to order. Good morning to all of you who've joined us today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge our members. Congressman Mark Vesey of Texas is here, and we also have an honorary member of Congress, and that is Chaplain Margaret Kibben. She is here, the chaplain of the House. And so, Chaplain, thank you. Hey, please come up front, mademoiselle. And so we're so fortunate to have Chaplain Kibben to be here. The Helsinki Commission has long seen freedom of religion or belief as a priority. Ukraine is a living example. Ukrainians of all backgrounds and creeds are bravely working together for the existence of their country in defense of their homeland, and ultimately in defense of freedom and democracy worldwide. And what we sadly can see, war criminal Putin is murderously attempting to recreate the failed Soviet empire to benefit the oligarchs, oppressing the Russians first and then invading liberated republics. And I just left a breakfast for the Central Asian republics with ambassador from Kazakhstan. And it can be identified that if he's going to recreate the Soviet Union, that includes the Central Asian republics too. It doesn't stop at Ukraine. It doesn't stop at Georgia. It doesn't stop at Moldova. We know that it continues. So all of us need to be working together for peace and stability and peace through strength. Religious freedom is respected and protected as one of the core values Ukraine fights for. Meanwhile, it is illegal in Russia to evangelize, as expressing religion that is not connected to the state as a threat to the facade that war criminal Putin depends on to stay in power. Christians in Ukraine, particularly evangelical Christians, we will learn more about today, have been the target of horrific torture and abuse by the Putin forces. Evangelicals are seen by the Kremlin as being pro-American and are specifically sought out for kidnapping and torture. Ukraine, some of which has been occupied for decades, and has since the 2014 invasion, which should not be forgotten, 10,000 or more Ukrainians were killed in 2014. And sadly, the world thought this would pass. No, it does not. It continues. It's not safe for Christians. We will learn today, because of war criminal Putin and his murderers and rapists, that things are not safe. It's not safe for anyone who refuses to submit to the demands of the occupiers. Those who serve a higher power present a real challenge for the war criminal Putin, both in Russia and in occupied Ukraine, as he and the delusional enablers worship the failed Soviet empire. I look forward to hearing about this from our witnesses. In addition, more about Ukrainian religious landscape and how the United States can support our Ukrainian friends living under Putin occupation. Their words will speak for themselves. The testimonies are graphic and incredibly disturbing. And we're very grateful. We've been joined by Dr. Andy Harris from Maryland, and so we appreciate his service. We have first Dr. Catherine Warner, who is a professor of history, anthropology, and religious studies at Penn State. Additionally, we have, speaking of his experiences in church leadership in occupied Ukraine, is Mark Sergeyev, here. And I should know because I'm really grateful that the church I go to, First Presbyterian Church, has been associated with the pastor's church and with Micah Ray in particular, and we appreciate that the pastors actually visited South Carolina, and we always welcome, as Chaplain Kibben know, we welcome chaplains to South Carolina. Finally, we have former Congressional Chief of Staff of Peter Roscom. Peter is a superhero of all things from Illinois, and is now the founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, Stephen E. Moore. With this, I will turn to any of the commissioners, particularly Mark Vesey, for any opening remarks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and great to be here today. And I want to give my appreciation to the panelists or for our guests for being here today to come and answer some questions and talk with us about the the issues around religion that is happening right now in Ukraine. I think particularly having this discussion that we're doing today with the visit that we're having from Prime Minister Netanyahu, so much of the conflict in that region goes back to the 19th century, much of it based on religion and lots of other sort of myths and stereotypes and tropes that people have of one another, and trying to figure out how you can live peacefully and at the same time deal with all of these issues. I think is very timely that we're having it today. And so I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, and I want to thank the chairman for putting this together. I think this is going to be an interesting discussion and a lot to learn, and hopefully we'll have more to share with the American public about what's happening in Ukraine around this topic of Ukrainian Christians as the day progresses. So appreciate you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Congressman Veazey, and I really appreciate Congressman Veazey shows the bipartisanship of us working together. Additionally, we have Wiley Nichols, Congressman Nichols, with us today, and he dressed up in a khaki suit. So some people really make us look good. And we begin with Dr. Catherine Warner.
than there are in any country in Europe. They include Baptists, evangelical Christians, Pentecostals, as well as other Protestants. Many factors have contributed to this concentration of Protestant believers in Ukraine, but surely the emergence of tolerance, religious diversity, and religious pluralism as governing principles are key among them. This has created a vibrant religious marketplace in which a plethora of religious groups compete for members, and in which religious symbolism and practice are broadly accepted in public institutions and in public space. When Ukrainian territories fell under Russian occupation in 2014, the persecution of minority religious communities followed. Evangelicals were especially targeted. And I'll discuss why evangelicals incur the wrath of Russian ruling authorities, and specifically what the consequences have been. The repression of evangelicals in the occupied territories of Ukraine has been so fierce because the established religious pluralism that allowed Protestant communities to thrive in Ukraine clashes with the imposition of the Russian world ideology that comes with Russian rule. The Russian world posits that Eastern Slavs are part of a single spiritual and historical civilizational space that includes Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and sometimes even Moldova and Kazakhstan. And increasingly, it really brings in anyone who recognizes the importance of traditional values and the Russian Orthodox Church as their protector. But the key point is that there is no place for Protestants in the Russian world. They are apostates to their faith and traitors to their nation precisely because they have abandoned orthodoxy. The Russian world ideology justifies the repression of religious minorities and privileges Russian orthodoxy as a state-protected guardian of these traditional values of public morality and social and political order. The second reason evangelicals have been targeted is that Baptists and evangelical Christians have long been demonized because of their negative association, because of the negative associations that Protestantism carries with the United States. Clergy and active believers are subject to charges of being foreign agents or American spies. The 2012 foreign agent law has been repeatedly used in Russia and now in the occupied territories to crack down on civil society organizations, to silence dissent, and jail even potential members of an opposition. This law is used to restrict religious freedom, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. It targets religious leaders, members of NGOs, human rights activists, and independent journalists, among others, by mandating complicated and often contradictory reporting and registration requirements. Non-compliance results in fines, jails, or closure of the organization. As a result, occupation by Russian forces slips easily and quickly into religious repression, especially of evangelicals, because the Russian state implements entirely different policies toward non-Russian Orthodox Church affiliated religious communities than the Ukrainian state does. The repressive treatment evangelicals received in the USSR and to a degree continue to experience in Russia is even more brutal and violent in the Russian-controlled occupied territories of Ukraine. So let's consider the consequences. Viewed as apostates to their native Orthodox faith, traitors to their nation, and foreign agents who undermine anti-Western Orthodox conservatism, evangelicals have been subject to searches, abductions, interrogations, unlawful detainment, and torture. They've had their property confiscated, their families threatened, and been subject to physical violence. Pastors are pressured to re-affiliate to religious organizations in Russia. And since 2022, over 40 clergy have faced reprisals and 5 have been killed. Residents of 8 Ukrainian regions under occupation report religious persecution and other violations of religious freedom. In Zaporizhia, there are at least 47 cases, Kherson, 20, Lugansk, 13, Donetsk, 11, and the list goes on. Russian Federal Law 114, also known as the Yarovaya Law, passed in 2016, is so broad so as to leave evangelicals vulnerable to charges of extremism or illegal missionary activities. As a result, many evangelicals were forced to flee the occupied territories. By December 2023, not even 2 years into the war, over 630 churches and religious buildings had been destroyed or damaged. 1/3, or at least 206, were Protestant. In occupied Donetsk, there were at least 146 documented cases of damaged or destroyed religious buildings. In Lugansk, at least 83, Kherson, 78, and in Zaporizhia, at least 51. Other religious buildings were looted and converted to arsenals, police headquarters, and United Russia offices. Only a few Protestant churches are open in the occupied Donetsk region. There are parts of Lugansk and Zaporizhia regions where not a single Protestant church remains opened. And we'll hear more about Melitopol, a city in southern Ukraine that at one point had more Protestant prayer houses than Orthodox churches prior to 2022, and today not a single Protestant church remains. There's little to suggest that such repressive measures against evangelicals will cease. In fact, the reverse is likely. As harsh as restrictions are on evangelical communities in Russia proper, they are far worse in occupied Ukraine. Whereas previously most evangelicals espoused an Anabaptist pacifism and performed alternative military service, now having declared this a just war, many evangelicals serve in the Ukrainian armed forces. Previous networks of cooperation and association of all kinds, missionary, humanitarian, and educational, that united Russian and Ukrainian evangelicals in common endeavor have been shattered as a result of this war. And this is true for nearly all religious associations and networks, regardless of confession, that linked Russian and Ukrainian co-believers. In sum, the occupation of Ukrainian territories has ushered in religious repression of evangelicals because the Russian state has distinct policies for non-Russian Orthodox Church religious communities. This is a long-standing practice and is unlikely to change under the current Russian leadership. And the goal for a democratizing Ukraine and for its allies is to ensure that religious freedom, tolerance, and pluralism are not additional casualties of this war. Russia and its president, Vladimir Putin, must be held accountable for their numerous war crimes in Ukraine so that they will be deterred from further attempts to use religion to inspire violence and should justify repression of religious minorities as they are doing in the occupied territories of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weiner, and both Congressman Vesey and I were so impressed to find out the level of the number of evangelical churches in Ukraine. That's not widely known. And so this, the American people need to know this. With that in mind, this hearing is so important. We've been joined by Marionette Miller-Meeks, a Congresswoman from Iowa, and then I'm very grateful to Congressman Jim Costa, again bipartisan, from California, and Congressman Robert Adeholt from Alabama. And so, again, it's bipartisan love and appreciation of the people of Ukraine. With that, we now proceed to Pastor Mark Sergeyev and of the New Generation Church, which is associated with the Baptist Church.
It's a great honor for me to speak in Helsinki Commission. The work of Commission is well known in Ukraine. And I'm grateful for the work of Commission does on behalf of Ukraine fighting for the freedom. Last week, I was at the front line in Chasiv Yar. My role as a chaplain and armored, I work for soldiers, and the battle are horrible. And the men and women fighting for Ukraine need spiritual guidance and emotional care. And I am proud to guide and help them and pray sometimes in difficult situations. Every Ukrainian soldier at the front is very thankful for American weapons. They fire javelins all day and fell asleep to the sound of HIMARS firing in Russian positions, and the soldiers sleep well. I want to say that the same Iran drones that attack Kyiv every night, they attack Israel, the same. But American technologies keep us both safety. My journey from Ukraine front to speak today starts 4 generations ago. I'm a 5th generation of evangelical Christians. My grandfather have been killed by Stalin because he was a Christian. My grandparents and my parents, they were always evangelical Christians, and they've been persecuted, and they were hiding their faith because they're afraid of their lives. I was born in Ukraine, in Melitopol city. It's at the Azov Sea. We call it the gates to Crimea. I was born in a free country. My father was a senior pastor of Melitopol Christian Church. It was the largest church in that area, and some American visitors often compares us like a Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church from Houston. We have a big stage, a big worship team, and we minister to 1,500 people every Sunday. We have 400 kids that attended to Sunday school. We were a spiritual home to the hundreds of Ukrainian families. Before war starts in Ukraine, we have this kind of dream. It's close to American dream to live great life, but Putin doesn't respond to a peaceful means. In February 2022, Russian tanks get inside of my city. They're rolling inside of the city, and I watch on this from the windows of my church. And 2 weeks later, somebody knocked on the door in my house, wake me up. And that was soldiers of Russian Rosgvardia. Maybe you heard about it somewhere in the news. They take me outside, put me on the ground. I was only in my underwear in that moment. They wake up my oldest son. He's 9 years old at that moment, in a AK-47 gun in the face. And, Russians are making a weapon of religion, and they're trying to make my father use the role as spiritual leader for a community to praise their invasions of our city. They told that to my father, you have 72 hours to record a video in the front of the church building that this is already Russian territory and Putin is our president, and just relax and wait. And then they give a couple hours to give a list of every businessman who supports the evangelical churches. They love money and always do this. And they told him that every day, if we will wait we'll just cut off the fingers on your hand. And it's God's miracle that they did not come back with their knives, but they take the building. We have this big long, 40 feet long cross in the front of the building. They cut off this cross and put the Russian flag right now. So now this big auditorium that used before to praising God and worshiping God, now they're using like a concert hall for the Russian military concerts and celebrating Russian holidays. I'm lucky to escape, and I'm here right now. It's the life miracle that I'm here alive, because I've been in crazy moments. I saw so many civilian killing people, dead people. My kids saw everything. If you ask me how it looked like, the picture, kind of very old movie about Second World War, Saving Private Ryan, the picture looked like the same. And finally we get out from it. It's a miracle. But before the war started in Melitopol, it's not a big city, but we have 40 evangelical churches in Melitopol. Today, there are not any kind of churches anymore. The only church left are those who are loyal to Moscow and rather than God. My parents lived through Soviet Union, and they say conditions today in Russian-occupied Ukraine are worse of believers that they were in Soviet times. I encourage the commission to go to Christian.org, where you can see videos from my church, how they look like before war, and security cameras, how Russian breaking into our churches in the dead of the night, and Russian TV footage of Melitopol Christian Church being used for Russian patriarch ceremonies. I will close the story of my friend Lena. She's a part of my church. She's a small group leader. 2 months ago, Russian soldiers came in her house and take her because, when they shut down every church in Melitopol, Christians go under the ground to worship God, and they get it together in small groups. Now she's in prison in Donetsk because she's just a Christian leader, because she just believes in God. 2 months ago, they take her, and now they give her 7 years because she's a Christian, and she's believing in God. Last night, I have fortunately to have a conversation with one American Christian leader, and he told me that he's concerned about the Ukrainian government persecuting Christians. Fortunately, I was able to have him understand the truth that he was hearing Russian propaganda. And the real truth is that Russian torturing, oppressing, and sometimes murdering Ukrainian Christians in my city and across occupied Ukraine, simple for being a Christian. I'm only one voice, and the voices against mine are powerful, but I'm grateful to Commission for giving me a voice, power, and helping Americans and the whole world know the truth of Russians' horrible oppressions of Ukrainian believers. Thank you very much, and may God bless you all. May God bless America.
Thank you so much, Pastor Zayev, and we just appreciate your visit to South Carolina, and indeed, Micah is such a champion for you. And indeed, again, the significance of this hearing, I'm very grateful that we've been joined by Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, and the good news is that as the House members run off to vote, we've got somebody who's very capable to keep the hearing going. So, so with this, he's appreciated for so many different reasons, all right? So I want to now recognize Stephen Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the honor of testifying before this commission today. As you so graciously mentioned, I was once a chief of staff to a member of leadership here in the House of Representatives.
Hey, say it, Peter Roscom.
Yeah, Peter Roscom.
Hey, a dear friend.
Anyone know Peter Roscom?
Hey, a friend of Senator Wicker here.
Yeah.
No,
so he still has a lot of friends here in the House of Representatives. I was honored to be his chief of staff for 7 years. And So as much time as I've spent in Congress, this is my first time on this side of the dais in this position right here. So it's particularly an honor for me to do this. And as a former staffer, I want to compliment the knowledge and the professionalism of the staff of the Helsinki Commission. The work of the Helsinki Commission is quite respected in Ukraine, and it's largely because of the personal relationships the staff has developed with people over there. And so they've been great to work with. So 5 days after Russia's full-scale invasion, I went to Ukraine to try to help my Ukrainian friends get to safety and provide humanitarian goods. I created the Ukraine Freedom Project and used that as a vehicle to bring supplies to Kyiv when that city was surrounded on 3 sides by Russians. We got food to Kharkiv while it was under siege, and I was one of the first wave of people at Akhmedov Children's Hospital earlier this month when it was bombed. In my 2.5 years living in Ukraine at war, I've seen and heard many things that nobody should. Even so, it's only a fraction of what the Ukrainians are going through. Some of the most horrific stories I've heard are from Ukrainian Christians who have been tortured by Russians. Russians occupying Ukrainian territory seek to systematically crush faith. Millions of Christians in occupied Ukraine are worshiping underground, as my colleague Mark Sergeyev said, in fear of torture and prison for their beliefs. Protestants make up less than 4% of Ukraine's population, but Protestants have borne the brunt of the Russian abuse. To fully understand why, I want to tell you about the role of the Russian Orthodox Church, which is not a church as we would think of one, but it's a working arm of the Kremlin. Patriarch Kirill, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, recently declared a holy war on Ukraine and the West. He promised that Russians who die fighting in Ukraine will have all their sins washed away. He stopped short of offering 72 virgins, but the strategy of creating martyrs is much the same as ISIS. Russians see Protestants as believers in American religion and think that they must be agents of America, like Russian Orthodox priests are agents of the Kremlin. I first became aware of Russia's torture of Christians in Ukraine in 2022 when Viktor Chernyavsky told me of his torture. Viktor was a pastor in Luhansk and had been evacuating people from occupied areas. One day, Viktor was leaving with a group of people that included a pregnant woman and a newborn infant. And the Russians pulled him over and took him to the basement. Now, going to the basement is a euphemism for torture. And they kept Viktor in the basement for 25 days. Including one day when he was tortured with an electrical taser, like you'd use it for self-defense, and a Russian Orthodox priest stood over him and tried to cast demons out of him for being an evangelical Christian. Viktor's story is far from unique. Only days into the occupation of his city, the Russian FSB came for Alexander Selfetnikov, pastor of the Light of the Gospel Baptist Church. The Russians beat him with rubber batons for 3 days, trying to make him confess to being an agent of the CIA. When they released him, he had to be wheeled out. His assistant pastor did not survive his torture. We've collected, as Mark had mentioned, we collected many similar testimonies on our website, russiatortureschristians.org. But unfortunately, most Ukrainian Christians can't speak out. One Ukrainian believer who escaped to Poland told us that after he went public with his torture, a Russian FSB agent in the still occupied hometown called him and told him what his teenage niece was wearing to school that day. This is the level of oppression. This is the level of detail the Russians go into to keep Christians oppressed in Ukraine. So, while Russians are trying to overtly destroy Christianity in Ukraine, in America, Russia's work to cover it up and spread false narratives to mislead Christians is active and ongoing. Right here on Capitol Hill, Russian money is behind the effort to persuade members of Congress that the Ukrainian government is persecuting Christians. The Commission's excellent work on this subject in 2023 help the world understand why this is Russian-inspired nonsense. But let me review. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church, for decades, the branch of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine, is home to thousands of clergy who have spent their lives reporting to Patriarch Kirill in Moscow. About 100 of these clergy are either in prison or on trial for espionage-related offenses. But this is just scratching the surface. We polled Ukrainians, and our polling shows that hundreds of thousands of people have left the Ukrainian Orthodox Church because they heard their local clergy say things against Ukraine or saw them do things to help the Russian war effort. So this national security threat is widespread. Yet a Russian-Ukrainian oligarch who is currently a deacon in the Russian Orthodox Church is paying a team of international lawyers and lobbyists, American lobbyists, hundreds of thousands of dollars to spread this false narrative inside Congress and cover up for Russian war crimes against Ukrainian Christians. Prominent members of the media and even some members of Congress continue to tell Americans that the Ukrainian government persecutes Christians. To understand the extent to which Russian propaganda has penetrated American media, the Ukraine Freedom Project polled Republican primary voters on their attitudes towards Russia. A quarter of Republican primary voters agreed with the statement, Russia is a country that promotes and encourages traditional family values. Now, this is Russia, the country that tortures Christians. Russia, the country that uses rape as a weapon of war. Again, this is Russia, the country that brags about kidnapping hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian Christians, and they promote traditional family values. We polled how... Give us that stat again. Sure. 25% of Republican primary voters agree with the statement that Russia is a country that promotes and encourages traditional family values. So, and we asked how they got this information. Again, 25% of all Republican voters believe this narrative. Among those who get their news from Tucker Carlson, it's 38%. Among those who get their news from Joe Rogan, it's 47%. Perhaps the most indicative to the degree to which our adversaries are collaborating is that people who get their news from TikTok believe it at the rate of 35%. So I want to thank the Commission for giving me today's opportunity to highlight the stories of so many brave Ukrainians, people I've gotten to know who have suffered for their faith and their country, and to highlight the work of my organization to help Ukrainians and tell their stories of torture at the hands of Russians.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And indeed, we're having votes now, and so what we'll be doing, I'll do 5 minutes, and Rachel Bellman in our office is really a taskmaster. She's going to watch the 5 minutes. I can't go beyond 5 minutes, Rachel. So, and then the House members will depart, vote, come back. In the meantime, everybody will be the beneficiary because Senator Roger Wicker will be in charge. And with that, it's a good one. Hey, but please, 5 minutes, go. Indeed, I want to thank each of you, and sadly, actually, Stephen, when you say TikTok, this is confirmation that there's an axis of evil. Okay, the axis of evil is the Chinese Communist Party, war criminal Putin, and the regime in Tehran. And people, and all Americans need to recognize, we're in a war and conflict we didn't start or want, and that is, it began February 24 in 2022, with the invasion by war criminal Putin into Ukraine. It continued with the invasion by the puppets of Tehran on October 7 into Israel. And sadly, it challenges, of course, the people, the Chinese Communist Party, Taiwan. And so we need to recognize that. And then I personally want to point out that indeed, Pastor, your bravery and the church that I go to, First Presbyterian Church in Columbia, South Carolina, is the sponsor of Russian language ministries. And it's Alex and Irina Panarov, who have worked throughout the Slavic world to promote love of Jesus, not politics. And indeed, our church sponsors programs for missions in Haiti, in Guatemala, in Wales, and Ukraine, and we've worked closely with Russian Americans coming to our church and love and affection that we have for the people of Russia. And so it's not political, and so it's just so insulting to think that American missionaries are political. It's not. It's out of love of Jesus. That's what it is. And with that in mind, and indeed, Stephen, you've brought it up, and that is the Russian narrative, which is a nice term for propaganda. How can we counteract that, and what messages can we have?
Well, so we've done extensive polling on this, and so we took a poll in the immediate aftermath of the vote on April 20th, and what we found was that 22% of Republican primary voters had heard something about the Tucker Carlson narrative that Ukraine is persecuting Christians. But the good news is that my organization, the Ukraine Freedom Project, and many of our allies, we had a lot of allies doing this, we ran a campaign for most of the last year leading up to the vote, telling Americans, particularly Republicans, particularly Republican evangelicals, that Russia is torturing and murdering Ukrainian Christians for their faith. And so while 22% heard the Russian narrative, 34% had heard our narrative. So it's a matter of getting good information to people about what is actually happening in Ukraine. And, you know, in the crazy times that we live, we are fortunate to find out that the truth still works.
Hey, the truth shall set you free. And Pastor Sergeyev, indeed, I was recently in Armenia, where it became so clear that war criminal Putin is trying to recreate the evil, failed Soviet Union. And so that means every former Soviet republic is at risk, whether it be Armenia or we see immediately in Ukraine, we've already seen in Georgia, we see in Moldova, we've seen threats to Estonia over and over again. And so with the persecution of Christians today in the occupied areas, how does that relate to the Soviet persecution?
Well, sir, I wanted to say one thing. Like I've been months ago in U.S. and sharing the stories. We have to understand that this war is not about territories, because Russia has the biggest territory. Some people I met, Americans, they say, "Hey, this is a fight for resources," and I'm smiling because it's crazy. They have so many resources. I mean, it's a spiritual war. They're trying to rebuild an empire. And like Ronald Reagan said, that was an empire of evil, and this is true. And I see this in my parents' generations. I see they're afraid because they know this. And like I said before, I have the whole generation who fight for freedom just to be a Christian. And we see this, they trying to do, and how I see right now, they start to close in the churches. Now they're going deeply because they take the buildings. They're going and clean up the small groups. And Patriarch Kirill has a big conversation with one mayor from the city, collaborant we call it in Ukraine. And he said, if you will not kill them, all Protestant people, you will not win in Zaporizhia area. And they make it publicly. So they're making kind of Christian jihad. And this is the problem.
Again, thank you for each of you for your courage. And now I'm very happy to turn it over to Senator Roger Wicker from this great state of Mississippi.
Well, thank you, and do hurry back. Mr. Veazey, do you have time to? We have time for you to ask your questions. If you, I'll go ahead and recognize you.
Oh, thank you very much. Dr. Warner, I wanted to ask you about the persecution of Protestant Christians in occupied Ukraine, and can you compare that to how other religions may be treated there? I know that there are Mormons there, that there are Jehovah's Witnesses, that there are other religions that are there. How are those other religions being retreated, or how are they being treated in comparison?
I think there's religious repression. There's religious repression of all non-Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Church affiliated religious communities. For example, in Ukraine, the second biggest faith group is the Catholic Church, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and they also are targeted for repression of their clergy and believers and the like. The problem is, though, in the occupied territories, there are very, very significant numbers of specifically Baptist and Pentecostal communities. And those faith groups have been especially targeted. They are targeted in Russia. They were targeted in the USSR. But those Baptist and evangelical Christian communities predominate in Ukraine, during the Soviet period even, and certainly in the post-Soviet period, those evangelical communities have continued to grow. They are, what's more, extremely active in the society, both politically in terms of social service provision and social policy formation and the like. And so it's specifically for a multitude of reasons that evangelicals, Baptist, evangelical Christians, and Pentecostals, those religious communities and those religious leaders have been especially targeted. They are seen as a threat to orthodoxy. They are quite visible, they are quite effective, and I would think that since the outbreak of the full-scale invasion, that these Protestant communities have been even more active in terms of providing humanitarian aid and serving not just their own communities, but serving the nation more broadly. And for these and many other reasons, the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine feels particularly threatened. They have historically, because of the American connection with Protestants, with Protestant faith groups, but even more acutely today.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Sergey, Mr. Sergeyev, I wanted to ask you, Mr. Sergeyev? I wanted to ask you about the young people in Ukraine. I think that one of the missions that we went on in Birmingham, England, a couple of years ago, we stayed right across the street from a church there, and I went and talked to the pastor, and he was telling me how church membership in England had been just dwindling everywhere, really. And of course, in order for churches to continue to grow and prosper, you have to have young people there that participate and feel comfortable and safe being in churches. And I wanted to ask you, what impact has this had on young people in Ukraine? And how do you think that they will view church and church attendance and being affiliated with churches in the future should these persecutions continue to happen?
I want to say one short thing. In the last 2 years, as I said before, like, I'm not only the youth pastor, I was a worship leader. We have a big YouTube channel of worship songs. So America was a big example for us for a long time. I mean, we sing the same songs, we translate them on Ukrainian language and even the Russian language. So in the last 2 years, me and my brother, we made 12 times a big worship school. And through this worship school, the young generation came, more than 4,500 people, musicians. They're still in Ukraine, still believing, and we kind of, from one place, we're still fighting. We have a war. Every night they shooting the missiles, putting the drones, but in that same moment, I see how many young generation, they're still believing and coming, and we have so many open new churches right now, even in Ukraine, in the midst of the whole chaos, the young generation still believing. And I told today before to a doctor that last year, I just posted one story on my Instagram, 15 seconds, come together and just get together on Maidan Square in the center of Kiev and pray about our soldiers. 500 young adults came from one story. And we just get together. We've been there 2 hours, and any kind of police officer came and said, hey, go home. I mean, we have this big freedom in the midst of the war, and we just get it together and pray. And it's not a problem for me make any kind of evangelical movement and put the stage in front of somewhere square and just worship God. So I see a future, and I'm still believing that God has a calling for this nation, That's where we're still fighting. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Veazey, and perhaps members of the House will be able to return. I can say that there are a number of senators who feel very strongly about this issue. We're getting ready for hearings, getting ready for markups, and there's an important joint meeting of the Congress today. So people will be coming in and out. I think at this point I'll take the liberty of making my opening statement. It may be then that members of the panel would like to respond to anything I might say. But I do want to thank my colleagues in the House and our great staff on the Helsinki Commission for putting this together. And I certainly appreciate the attendance today. This is a very large crowd. And I see people identified as clergymen, and certainly I am sure there are members of a variety of religious faiths. It's interesting that today a number of us in the House and Senate will stand honoring the right of people of the Jewish faith to live and to have a homeland where for once in the history of several millennia, they'll be able to be safe. And so I think the Helsinki Commission and this hearing stands for a larger principle, and that's our First Amendment right to freedom of religion as part of freedom of expression. Our witnesses today remind us of a tragically overlooked victim of the dictator Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine, and that's the Ukrainian evangelical community. Former U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, has been a leading advocate on this issue. And at this point, I would enter for the record a piece he wrote highlighting the mistreatment of those Christians. It's dated Friday, April 19, 2024, and I hear no objection, so without objection, it will be admitted. Under Russia's thumb, evangelical leaders have been systematically persecuted for their faith. Some have been tortured or sent away. Some have been killed. Groups of evangelical faithful have been forced to assemble in secret. They know their gatherings could be violently disrupted at any time and that they could suffer physical harm without a moment's notice. In at least one instance, Russian soldiers swarmed a church as congregants were singing songs of worship. And I do appreciate, Mr. Sergeyev, the fact that you like to sing the same hymns as we do. I'm old-fashioned myself and like the traditional hymns. There's a bit of debate in my denomination about that. But Russian soldiers have evicted members and turned Ukrainian churches into propaganda offices. In Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine, there's no accountability for these crimes. Vladimir Putin plays by his own rules. Inside Russia, he broadcasts the lie that evangelicals are political tools of the United States. To the rest of the world, he falsely claims that Ukraine is actually the one persecuting believers. And as witnesses have said just today, he's persuaded some vocal, visible voices in the United States, unbelievably, to make that assertion. It's almost inconceivable that that could be taking place. Vladimir Putin lies because there's no honest reason for his assault on Ukraine. Only a cloud of falsehoods can obscure his crime and create the illusion that he's doing God's work. It reminds me of what we used to call during the Soviet era the big lie. Leaders tell a lie so fantastic and so vast that some people, gullible people, hearing that can't imagine that anyone would tell such a tale if it weren't the truth. That's the big lie. And Mr. Putin has learned from some of the masters of the big lie that dominated the USSR during time. Erasing evangelical churches is part of Mr. Putin's goal to erase Ukraine as a nation. Evangelical churches reflect the tradition of religious freedom in Ukraine. That spiritual legacy has flourished in the country since the fall of the Soviet Union, the kind of regime Russia hopes to reassert. And that's what they're up to. It's Ukraine today. It's a couple of provinces in Georgia. It's tacking at the border of Armenia. There are too many places where Mr. Putin's Russia is involved to think that he's doing anything else. The kind of regime cannot allow religious freedom because free thinking presents a threat to a tyrant like Vladimir Putin. It exposes his lies to the detoxifying effects of the open air. The United States and Ukraine prioritize freedom of religion. In Russia, Putin permits the practice of organized religion only if he deems it sufficiently loyal to his regime. Russian invaders will require that Ukrainian evangelicals swear loyalty to Putin before allowing them to practice their faith. This vile threat asks simply that Ukrainian evangelicals violate their faith by placing a man above God. Vladimir Putin demands that believers forswear their allegiance to Christ and place it in the hands of a murderous, godless tyrant. So I urge us all to be skeptical when we hear malicious lies that Russia is a haven for Christian civilization and traditional values. What a fantastic lie. In Russia and Russian-occupied Ukraine, there's no respect for the primacy of conscience, the freedom of the individual, and the dignity of human life. The occupiers defile churches, abduct and torture pastors, as we've heard today in testimony, and erase whole congregations. Russia has forced the once vibrant Ukrainian evangelical community underground. To the Ukrainian evangelicals risking their lives every day by expressing their beliefs, I have to say this: keep the faith. Justice will come for the Russian aggressor. And I say that to members of all faiths, all religions, of whatever stripe, in Ukraine. You have a right, no matter what your beliefs are, to express your faith. And it is my fervent hope that the United States and other members of the OSCE will stand for justice for the Russian aggressor. Now, at this point, that concludes my formal statement, and we've already entered into the record the article from April written by my former colleague, former Representative and former Governor Brownback. Let me ask you, and I'll start with Mr. Moore. In about the third or fourth paragraph of Ambassador Brownback's article, he mentions the Russian Orthodox Church as you described it, Mr. Moore, but I hope you'll help us clear up a statement that I've heard you make that seems to contradict what I understand Ambassador Brownback is saying. He says there is a now independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is fully in support of freedom of religion and does not answer to Russia. So if you would discuss that and tell us your understanding of the Russian Orthodox Church from Moscow, which is still present in parts of Ukraine, as opposed and compared to the now independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine.
Yeah, happy to help out on that. So in 2019, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, not to be confused with the Orthodox, which I did confuse. But the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is the homegrown Ukrainian branch of Orthodoxy that reports to the Patriarch in Kiev, where the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is the branch that reports to Moscow. And if you look at this over time, you know, at the beginning of independent Ukraine, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was attended by probably 70% of Ukrainians, and so this is the one that reports to Moscow. And as that church became increasingly more pro-Russian, then more and more Ukrainians left it. And you know, we have polling that details this and shows, we asked people, you know, we did basically a customer service poll of former members of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and we found out why they left. You know, a majority of them left simply because they felt that the church was too pro-Russian. And as I mentioned in my testimony, about 8% left because they had seen the clergy do something to aid the Russian war effort or to say something against Ukraine. So you know, the majority of Ukrainians are voting with their feet, so to speak. They're leaving the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is loyal to Moscow, and they're joining the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which is the one that has a patriarch in Kiev. So, does that help with your question?
Well, let me see if I can rephrase this.
Sure.
There is the Orthodox Church of Russia with a patriarch in Moscow. There was a Ukrainian Orthodox Church with a patriarch in Kiev who answered to the patriarch in Moscow. There was. Now, Dr. Wenner, would you like to take issue with that?
It's a complicated situation.
Well, it surely is.
I'll try to.
That's why it's taking me some
I'll try to be very
time.
brief.
Yeah.
I'll try to be. There's the Russian Orthodox Church that has a patriarch in Moscow, and for over 300 years, Ukrainian religious life was under that.
Such
Moscow
as it
patriarchate.
could be under the USSR.
Correct. Such as it could be. But the Russian Orthodox Church was the one church that was allowed to function in a somewhat unencumbered way, unlike, for example, evangelicals that were heavily, heavily monitored and repressed in the Soviet Union. Having said that, the Russian Orthodox Church did exist throughout the Soviet period and continues to exist. So the churches after Ukrainian independence, those Orthodox churches in Ukraine became known as the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate because they are institutional connections that bring them, they're under the patriarch in Moscow. This became, after almost 3 decades of an independent Ukrainian state, this became increasingly unacceptable in Ukraine, that they did not have their own Orthodox Church with their own patriarch. And of course, especially after 2014, when the war broke out, momentum for severing ties with Moscow mounted. And it was at this period, Stephen's correct, in 2019, a separate Orthodox Church was formed. But that means in Ukraine, there are 2 Orthodox churches, which is a highly unusual situation. One Orthodox Church has a patriarch or a leader in Kiev. The other Orthodox Church is not entirely independent, it's not entirely autonomous, it has a very amorphous and evolving relationship, but it still is formally connected with the Moscow Patriarchate.
But can we both agree, can Mr. Moore and Dr. Wenner both agree that there is a now independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine that does not answer to anyone in Moscow?
Correct. That's correct. Right. That's correct.
Mr. Sergeyev, would you like to comment on this before I move on to another topic? I'm sure you can't imagine why anyone would stay in the Orthodox Church and not
wanna-
join yours. But that's their right, isn't it?
We have, before the war started in Melitopol, we have a big community of pastors, and we have great relationship with, and even Moscow Orthodox Church. But as a chaplain, I can say a couple of weeks ago, when I come back from the front line, I've been in one area, one city, where was one Moscow Orthodox temple, and it's right now completely destroyed by Russians. But our soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, take one priest, Pope, from this, and Russia changed this priest on 90 Ukrainian soldiers. Russia gave for one Orthodox priest 90 Ukrainian soldiers who've been in prison. It tells us a story that how many,
In a prisoner exchange.
they changed one on 90. So many agents of Russia work inside of Ukraine, and they look like Christians. They making services and kind of worshiping God, but they are just working for Putin. And this is a fact. I'm like a military chaplain, and I know these stories, how they look like. So this church for Ukraine, it's very dangerous, really, for our nation. I understand from one side we are living in democracy country, and we are believing that everything is okay. Yeah, we have to build our church and be free in our religious faith. But as I see, every church, every pastor who run away from occupation in Melitopol, they support Ukraine. Greek Catholics, Roman Catholics, Kiev Orthodox Church, but only one priest who still there in occupation and work with Russia is from the Moscow Orthodox Church. So it's the facts that I just give you, and we're praying. But yeah.
Okay, well, in the occupied territory, are the churches that do not answer to Moscow, are they all underground, or are some of them still able to operate in the open? And how do underground churches meet and work? They have to move from place to place. Just describe that a little.
There is not anymore any kind of evangelical churches at occupied territories.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Not even underground?
Like I said before, a couple of small groups, and even they come in sometimes in the houses and take them in prison.
Small prayer groups, things like that.
3 people.
Right.
I cannot say here publicly because so many people, it's dangerous for them, but I still in contact with these people, with the leaders. And sometimes they're not even, we just change the numbers. We speak secretly because it's dangerous for their life. But we understand how many, I know how many people still, members from my church still there in occupied territories and still getting together to pray. But it's dangerous for their life, really.
Well, okay. Now, I assume in the areas of Ukraine that are not occupied by Russia, is there total religious freedom?
100%.
Okay. And I believe it's true that by some 70+% in the last presidential election, the voters in Ukraine elected a Jew as their president. Is that correct?
Well, he's not active Jew. I mean, but...
Well, he says he is.
He's Jewish, yeah.
Okay.
He's Jewish.
I might add that the defense minister is Muslim.
There you go. All right. So, is there any hint of a reason why any independent observer would say there is a problem with religious freedom in the non-occupied part? I mean, are the Russian Orthodox churches discriminated against by the government or by the police in the free part of Ukraine? Dr. Wanner. Yeah.
There is a motion to discuss the status of what's called the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. The status of this religious group in Ukraine. And that's because, you very accurately depicted the attitude of the Russian state towards repressing dissent of any form. One of the things that Vladimir Putin has instrumentalized, even weaponized, is religion. And he has weaponized this, I would go beyond what was stated earlier, not just in the former republics turned independent countries of the former Soviet Union, but he is doing this around the world. That is to say, using the Russian Orthodox Church, if you will, almost as an arm of to pursue Russian foreign policy and to enhance the geopolitical position of the Russian Federation and to alter alliances in favor of the Russian state. So this is one of the reasons why the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, that at least formally still has institutional connections to Moscow, becomes an object of concern in Ukraine today. Beyond that one issue, I think there is tremendous religious freedom in Ukraine, and that's why Protestant communities were not only able to be created, but to grow in Ukraine, and why I would say even before 2014, they in fact had Ukraine, if you will, as a base that served Eurasia. In other words, Protestant communities in Ukraine were very, very active in terms of humanitarian, educational, missionizing endeavors. And this, of course, is seen as a threat in Russia precisely because of the potential growth of Protestantism that represents, and given the negative associations of Protestantism, and specifically of the Baptist Church and Evangelical Christian and Pentecostal churches, then that makes then a multiplication of potential American spies, if you will, to use their rhetoric, throughout wherever those particular faith communities should grow, be they in Eurasia, be they on the African continent, be they in the occupied territories of Ukraine. And that is why the position of the Russian Orthodox Church, by and large, has been to shut down those churches, shut down those kinds of missionary, educational, and humanitarian efforts.
Let me ask you to expound on that. But first of all, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You are.
It's Wanner.
Yes.
Okay. Then compare with us other former USSR countries. And then I think you mentioned Africa also. Are Protestant congregations in Ukraine currently, and have they been sending missionaries to these other places like the former USSR in Africa? Or how has it spread?
To the extent that that is possible. And of course, that wavers over time, and of course, country to country. But yes.
Well, where is which former USSR countries are doing better in that regard, in allowing religious freedom and allowing other?
If you want to count the Baltics, I mean, they're of course part of the EU, and so they then adopted EU legislation. But of the other former republics turned independent countries of the former USSR, I would say there's none.
The stands
they do not
don't have
suppress
much
Ukraine, in my view.
to brag about.
Because, for example, I mean, there are robust Muslim communities in Ukraine as well that are driven by immigrants from primarily Muslim countries of the former Soviet Union to Ukraine, as well as by a burgeoning Afghan community in Ukraine. So there's quite a few Muslims in Ukraine at this point, and they too are quite vocal. They too serve as chaplains in the Ukrainian armed forces.
Which one of you could give us some statistics about religious affiliation and membership in Ukraine? How many Baptists are there? How many new Ukrainian Orthodox there? Does anybody have those statistics? Yeah, okay, Mr. Secretary,
A
then we'll
couple
get
of
back to you.
phrases. We have the Baptist Union. This Baptist Union has more than 2,000 churches in Ukraine, and now it's the biggest Baptist union in Europe, if we count the people. We have Pentecostal Union. We have more than 3,500 churches in Ukraine.
Well, what percentage of the population would be in those two?
It's not a big one. It's not the United States. I mean, I think it's kind of 3%.
We've polled it, and so Protestants are about 4% of the Ukrainian population. But oddly enough, Baptists are the third largest Christian denomination. After there's Orthodox, there's Greek Catholic at about 10%, and then Baptist is the next biggest denomination. Among Orthodox, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church that reports to Moscow is in that 4% range as well. And again, they're
Okay, down to 4%.
yeah, so their parishioners have plummeted, and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine has I want to say around 50%. I can get those numbers to the commission, but it's a very large percentage.
Well, listen, Mr. Chairman, I do believe my 5 minutes has expired. Let me just end with this. Here's why freedom has got to win out in the end. And I want to quote from Ecclesiastes, 3rd chapter, 11th verse. He has set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom the work that God has done from the beginning to the end. There is something in the human soul that makes most of us seek to understand eternity and spiritual things. And when freedom allows that to flourish, humankind is better. And what you are about and what you're doing is so important. I'm so grateful to each of you for taking a stand and for helping us to understand it better on this side of the Atlantic. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Acting Chairman. And we're really grateful. The first string was here, now the second string. So we now proceed to Congressman Wiley Nickel of North Carolina.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Slava Ukraini. It's great to be with you. I just returned several weeks ago from a bipartisan, bicameral visit to Ukraine for about a week. We were joined by Senator Wicker, your colleague, Joni Ernst, had a very important fact-finding mission, and the issue of persecution of evangelical Christians in Ukraine is an incredibly important topic, and I'm really glad to be joined in a bipartisan way here to shed light on this, because this is an issue that is not getting enough attention right now. Thank you to the U.S. Helsinki Commission for organizing today's hearing, and to our witnesses again for being with us. Ukraine is a nation with a rich tradition of religious freedom. It's home to many Christian denominations. Unfortunately, under Russian occupation, these communities have faced severe repression and violence. When I traveled to Ukraine earlier this year, I heard about the atrocities firsthand and had the opportunity to meet with Tamila Teshiva, the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and Dr. Viktor Yelensky, a Ukrainian scholar and politician. We discussed their efforts to prevent further human rights violations and to protect victims of the Russian occupation. I hope that today's hearing will shed further light on these atrocities and highlight the urgent need for Ukrainian victory to restore and protect religious freedom. First question, Mr. Moore, thank you so much for your leadership. It must be unusual to be on the opposite side of the hearings here today. But so far, you seem to be doing very well.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Well, you guys make it easy. Thank you for that.
grateful for your work with the Ukraine Freedom Project. It's been crucial to documenting and exposing Russia's systematic oppression of Ukrainian Christians. Can you talk more about the specific challenges you've faced in bringing this information to the international community's attention?
Sure. Well, there's getting the information to begin with, because the atrocities are all happening in the occupied areas, and oddly enough, the Russians are not welcoming me there, and so getting that information is difficult. And then because of so many people, like Pastor Sergeyev, have friends that are still in these occupied territories, there's a lot they can't say. So the Russians are very good at oppressing people and finding leverage on them and making them do what they want. And the Russians don't want this to get out. So that's a problem. And then there's just generating interest among it. So we started a campaign in earnest last September, almost a year ago now. And, I wrote an op-ed and I shopped it around to everyone I could possibly find. And no one wanted it. It took me weeks. And finally, a niche publication for Christian foreign policy called Providence Magazine, a great bunch of folks doing really good work, took my first op-ed. And from that, then that generated a lot of other work. And ultimately, as more and more people got involved in this, and more, we were able to, there was 100 articles about this between October and April, and we were responsible for about 70 of them. And so generating that interest, and then also finally just working against the people who are not constrained by the truth. The Russian propagandists are not constrained by the truth. And, they have more money than we do by a lot. If we get into the six figures in fundraising, it's that's a good year for us. And meanwhile, the estimates of Russian propaganda spending worldwide is like $2.4 billion. So there's a massive tide that we're swimming against. And, and again, as I mentioned to Chairman Wilson earlier, fortunately, the truth still works.
Thanks so much. Pastor Sergeyev, can you describe the impact of Russian occupation on your church community and how your congregation has been able to maintain their faith and resilience during such a truly difficult time?
Excuse me, how they what?
How they've been able to maintain their faith, the impact of Russian occupation on them?
Well, look, 80% of our members run away. We have a couple of churches, small churches in Germany right now, and get it together. So many people at Ukrainian territory, free territory, but we still have kind of maybe 200 in small groups. I said before, I cannot tell you how much, where, but the good news is that so many Ukrainians get to Europe, and now we have hundreds of new churches open because they're free people and they believe in God and they just spread the gospel and open up the new churches. I mean, this is 24th country in the last 2 years for me. I've been twice in Israel, and I met so many Ukrainians that work in Israel right now and preaching the gospel and sharing the stories. They run away from one war. Now they, in Israel, got another one war. Some of people from Ukraine, third time they coming back to Europe from Israel because Hamas is shooting. And I think this is kind of new level of faith, I think, and we're just sharing the stories. And I really still believe that God has a big calling for this nation. That's why I'm here, sharing the story. And that's why I'm coming back tomorrow to Ukraine, because there are soldiers waiting for me to listen, to help. And we have a big community of chaplains right now. It's kind of new wave. And actually, I want to say a big thank you to every American chaplain that coming to Ukraine and helping us, because you have a big experience. The story of American chaplain is 200 years. We have only last 9 years, like we have this experience, and we're waiting, and we're very faithful for support of chaplains who serve to Ukrainian nation and teach us how to do this whole thing and work with the PTCR. Is that correct? PTCR in Ukrainian, how to help to the soldiers, because even yesterday I saw the helicopter and I'm a little bit afraid, because always when I see something in the sky, really inside of me, I'm preparing that if somebody have to shut down or it gonna come in some buildings. Yeah, so this is our life right now.
Thank you so much. My time has expired.
If I could just add one thing, I'd like to just, because it's timely, it's something that Pastor Sergeyev mentioned. So the first place that Hamas went after October 7th was to Russia, to Moscow, to see Putin. And Putin has been periodically organizing summits between the Palestinian terror organizations, Iran, and he's doing this in Moscow. So as we listen today to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech and we listen to the protesters, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of who Hamas allies are, who's Iran's allies. It's Russia, it's Moscow, it's Putin.
That's a great point. And just on the chaplain issue, I was glad to see that the chaplain for the U.S. House of Representatives joined us earlier. I saw her here. But thank you so much, Chair Wilson, for your leadership on this issue, bringing much-needed attention to this very important issue.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Again, you can see it's bipartisan, Democrat, Republican, and indeed, as we conclude, I appreciate, Stephen, you bring up, hey, connecting the dots. There are good people who simply are not connecting the dots. The dots are perfectly clear. It's called Iranian drones being used by war criminal Putin to kill Ukrainians, okay? But that's just one dot. I mean, there are dots everywhere. Hamas showing up in Moscow, Hamas showing up in Beijing. How could this be? And Hamas really is a puppet of the regime in Tehran. But, and so I just want to thank you all. We've got to educate the American people, because there are good people who are just not understanding that we're facing an axis of evil, and that is the regime in Tehran. We've got war criminal Putin and the Chinese Communist Party, and they're working together, collaborating together to invade democracies, and their goal is really, they are very eager to let us know in English. That is death to Israel, death to America. And so it's a foreign war today, but their plan is to bring it here. And so I want to thank you. And then we also need to get across that indeed, what war criminal Putin is trying to do, the way he has misled the people of the Russian Federation, is to recreate an empire. But they need to know it's the failed Soviet empire for the benefit of oligarchs. It does not benefit the people of Russia. And I've had wonderful visits. I had my business cards in Russian. And I was so hoping, Chelyabinsk is the sister city of my hometown, Will's hometown of Columbia, South Carolina. I'm very grateful to have visited Novosibirsk. One time, Stephen, there was a billboard in English that said, "Welcome to Novosibirsk, the Chicago of Siberia." I have had a University of South Carolina student who was from St. Petersburg as an intern in my office, and I stayed with his family in St. Petersburg. And so I just had such high hopes, visits to Moscow. I led a delegation to place a wreath at the world's largest open cemetery, the victims of the siege of Leningrad, and 500,000 people buried in an open cemetery. And we put a wreath there in the shape of the United States, in red, white, and blue flowers, to show our love and affection for the people of Russia. And while I was there, I found out that the success, Dr. Warner would know, but I didn't know, and that is that the success of Joseph Stalin to stop Hitler at Leningrad was due to American Lend-Lease. All of the equipment that the Soviets used was equipment provided by the United States to our, at that time, Soviet allies. And so over and over again, we have a deep affection for the people of Russia, and we want the best. And a final point, that really, I had the opportunity gruesomely to visit Bucha. And so I was there, and I met with a grandmother who told about, she was just driving along with her 16-year-old grandson in the front seat, and the Russian soldier, without any provocation, without any warning, shot and killed her grandson on the front seat of the car. And then we visited with the family who, their family members were taken out of their home. They're in Bucha, and they took the family out, hands tied behind their back, shot them in the head and buried them in a yard. And then putting it in perspective for Americans, in visiting Bucha, I could have been in any American subdivision, a suburban area. The homes were very Americanized. And in fact, something that we could all identify, 2 blocks from where the executions took place, there is still a functioning drive-through McDonald's. We're not talking about some third world nowhere. And so it's just so important that we support the people of Ukraine, support the people of Israel, support the people of Taiwan, that we maintain the borders of Ukraine, the borders of Israel, the borders of Taiwan, and the borders of the United States. And with that, we are adjourned.